Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Steven here with Team Euphoric, and this is day 19 of the 80 Days to Your Dream Body course. Today's protein source is going to be rabbit, and today is going to be a shoulders and arms training routine. And the theme for today's workout is going to be assisted PNF stretching. So right now, I'm going to be demonstrating some more assisted PNF stretches. Now let's get started. And while we are resting, let's continue with our PNF demonstration in a prone position. What we are going to do now is we're going to be focusing on the hip flexors. For the hip flexors, the hand positioning, what we could do is we could either have one hand on the sacrum. And for me, when I'm performing it, I like to have my hand pointing adjacent to the spine. So I will have it perpendicular to the spine because if I go over here, it could be a little bit awkward. Over here, it's just a lot more comfortable because then I could really use my leverage. Over here, everything is kind of closed up, but find which one works for you. For you, you may find that this is a little bit more comfortable. For me, I like to go at a perpendicular angle to the spine. But what I would do is with my stabilizing hand, apply a downward pressure to the sacrum. And then with my moving hand, for this one, we want it to be a deep hip flexor stretch. So we're keeping the knee in extension. That way we could get a little bit of slack on the rectus femoris that crosses both the hip and knee. Remember, the rectus femoris attaches to the anterior inferior spine, inferior iliac spine, and the patella. So it's responsible for both hip flexion and knee extension. So if we have the knee flexed, it's going to become a little bit more superficial, and we're not really going to get a full deep stretch in the hip flexors. So for the hip flexors, for the deep stretch, make sure that you keep the knee extended. But what we would do for this one right over here, stabilizing hand, you're going to apply a downward pressure. With the moving hand, you're going to take an underhand grip under the thigh. And then what you could do to make it more comfortable is you could just go ahead and take the patient's tibia and fibula and sandwich it in between your bicep and your rib cage. Then from this position, what we would do is we would traction out, then lift up and instruct the patient. Inhale, bring your leg down to the ground. They would inhale, bring the leg down. And then on the exhale, you would traction and lean a little bit more to get deeper into the stretch. You can also use a different cue. Just say bring your knee down to the ground. Use whatever cue you need to get the job done. Different patients will respond differently to different cues. So when you find a cue that works, just kind of stick with that. With regard to this stretch right over here, we could also change the angle. So instead of just going straight into hip extension, we could go into hip extension on an abduction of, let's say, 15 degrees. So we just go out 15 degrees, and then we would do the same thing. We would go traction, take them into extension, and then inhale, bring your knee down to the ground. They would inhale, contract, and then exhale, traction, lift up. If their range of motion allows, we could also go a little bit more into abduction. So take them out to 30 degrees. Inhale, bring the knee down. They would inhale, contract, exhale, traction, and lift. With regard to this one right over here, this is primarily going to be targeting the deep hip flexor muscle. So we're going to be getting the iliopsoas, the psoas major, and the iliacus, as well as the proximal fibers of the rectus femoris. Remember, rectus femoris attaches at the anterior inferior iliac spine into the patella. So because the knee is straight, we're not really getting stretch at the distal fibers. All of the stretch is happening at the proximal attachment. But this one right over here, it's also going to be different depending on the positioning. So when we are going straight up and down, we're going to be targeting all of the deep hip flexors. And as we go more into abduction, we're going to start targeting more of the medial fibers of the hip flexors, as well as getting a little bit into the adductors. But some of the other muscles that we will be stretching when we are performing this is going to be the sartorius, the tensor fasciae lati muscle, and the pectineus and adductor longus and adductor brevis. The more into abduction that we go, the more we will start getting into the adductor longus and brevis because it's an adductor. So by taking them into abduction, we will be shifting the emphasis a little bit onto the adductor longus and brevis. And then some other muscles that will be minimally stretched in this position is going to be the adductor magnus, specifically the anterior fibers of the adductor magnus, and the anterior fibers of both the gluteus medius and minimus. But again, with regard to the adductor magnus, the more we take them into abduction, the more the emphasis is going to start to shift into the adductors. So in the neutral position, we're getting very little of the adductor magnus, but as we start taking them out, there will be a little bit more of an emphasis on there. But our rest period is up. Time for set number 3. That was just a tiny taste of what can be found in my members only section. If you enjoyed it, become a member for only $5 a month to get access to hundreds of member only videos.